I am joined now by Larry Klayman. He is the founder of Freedom Watch, a former federal prosecutor. And welcome, Larry. Happy Tuesday to you.
Good morning, Bill.
I want to start with a little piece of irony. President Obama returned to the public sphere yesterday after taking a little bit of a vacation and stepping out of it. And he spoke at the University of Chicago. It was kind of a Q&A session, a little back and forth. And in the talk to the students and folks there, he talked about special interest and how their things are bad. That special interest thing is bad. But then after the meeting, we found out that he's about to accept $400,000 for speaking to a special interest group known as Wall Street later this year, hosted by Cantor Fitzgerald. I'm a little bit amused, Larry. What do you make of this?
Well, given his past history, you can be amused now, but it's consistent with everything he's done. You know, he's claimed that he's not a one-percenter. He criticized rich people in this country. He is a socialist. But of course, he lives in Colorado, Washington, in a house that's valued at millions and millions of dollars. He's like a 0.1%er at this point in time. And the fact that he would take $400,000 a pop is no surprise. He's worth over $100 million. So he obviously had to acquire it some way. But yesterday he spoke at the University of Chicago, Bill, and ironically, I didn't realize that he was there. I've been very busy lately preparing another case against the University of California in Berkeley, which will be filed probably in the next few days. But I actually sent a process server out there to serve him with a complaint, just missed him. And in fact, he's been sued for inciting violence. And he's running inside of this very wealthy house in Colorado, close to where Hillary Clinton lives in Washington, D.C., rich area, an alternative government, which is whipping up protest and violence throughout the country. He's working with George Soros. He's working with other radical groups. He's out there now making money for himself, but he's quite politically active. And in fact, we sued him for inciting violence at Berkeley and elsewhere.
Tell us about that lawsuit really quickly. How so, and how is he complicit in any violence at Berkeley?
Well, we didn't sue him for the one that I'm filing in the next few days. But you might remember when President Trump issued his temporary moratorium on immigration from 7 and then 6 predominantly Muslim countries.
Yes.
He was out there urging the protesters to go at it. And I actually was coming into LAX that day when these protests were really erupting, not just in Berkeley, but all over the country. And I was assaulted in LAX at the baggage claim by someone who appeared to have an Islamic accent and threatened everybody that was there. Now, that coincided with President Obama's, in effect, call to violence at that time. I mean, that's what was being stoked. It was known that these civil disobedient people were out there committing acts of violence, and I've sued him, along with others, for assault.
It's interesting, in those countries you mentioned, we should, in Trump's executive order, we should reiterate our countries that were identified by President Obama as being terrorist states. So this was not an invention of Trump in terms of the states involved. It was his administration that did that. I want to talk about another thing that the former president talked about at Chicago yesterday, and he talked about immigration. He was asked a number of questions about it. And if we have a piece of sound, let's hear what he had to say in terms of immigration.
Immigration is a good example of an issue that stirs up so much passion and sometimes misinformation that it's hard for us to have a good, healthy conversation about it. The interesting thing is, historically, when you look at surveys, the overwhelming majority of Americans believe that America is a nation of immigrants.
You know, having done a number of stories on immigration, I always love that phrase. Americans believe we're a nation of immigrants. It's a fact. We're a nation of immigrants, Larry. It's not a belief thing. But, you know, it ties into this topic in this way. His administration, turns out, mishandled immigrant applications for U.S. citizenship ahead of the 2016 election, leaving a backlog of 630,000 applications due to a flaw in a computer system that his administration bought to help U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services. This bill cost $1 billion, Larry. It's nuts. So here's a guy who's championing immigration rights, but at the same time, he seems to have further complicated an already deeply flawed system.
Well, he was not the most competent of presidents. I think we all can agree. We see what's happening now with North Korea, with Syria, with Afghanistan, with Russia. I mean, he left a whole bunch of problems. And nobody's anti-immigrant. I'm not anti-immigrant. Many years ago, I did a presidential debate in the year 2000, and part of the issue was legal immigration. So no one's against that. But he likes to play that card.
Yep.
And it's ironic. He has a chip on his shoulder. You know, his father overstayed a student visa and was actually deported from the United States. And I think that influences his thinking with regard to illegal aliens, is that his father, having been wronged in his own eyes, he's now in favor of illegal immigration, as most Democrats are, because in California, New York, they can get driver's licenses. They then can vote. They're the basic constituency of the Democratic Party these days. So that's what it's all about for them. This is a big voting bloc after African Americans have shied away from them to some extent, out of Jewish people are increasingly turning away from the Democratic Party, given Obama's hostility to Israel. So his discussion of immigration is colored by his own political beliefs and his own personal history with his deported father, I believe.
Yeah, no, I always love it when people talk about they love a nuanced, intelligent debate about immigration, and then they lay down a fact or a statement which indicates they're not interested in anything nuanced, anything intelligent, or anything else. They want to say, well, nation of immigrants, as if that's an answer to something somehow. Changing topics, I want to talk about a piece that you recently published that had to do with something you called the Extortion 17 cover-up. You make the argument, and I want you to explain Extortion 17 cover-up, but you make the argument that this cover-up is the reason why suddenly Representative Jason Chaffetz, who we just saw in the news update, announced last week he is not running for re-election. Please explain, Larry.
Extortion 17, and you can find a press conference we did and a lot of other materials on our website at freedomwatchusa.org, was the biggest loss of life in the Afghan war. It occurred 3 months after bin Laden was allegedly killed. I say allegedly because no one's ever seen a photograph. Some people think he died of natural causes before. But it was payback. And we have lawsuit pending against Iran, against Afghanistan, against former Afghan President Karzai for this tragedy, which resulted on August 6, 2011. And there were many unanswered questions. We represent some of the families. They were sent in, 30 servicemen, 22 special ops, on a very slow Chinook helicopter. The military claimed there was no eyes in the sky. They claimed the black box went missing because of a flood. There hasn't been a flood in Afghanistan since Noah's Ark. There are many anomalies, such as 7 Afghan commandos. We had these joint missions, were substituted out at the last minute. 7 inserted. We don't know who they are. Bodies were cremated without the permission of families. To make a long story short, we had a congressional hearing started by the Government Oversight and Reform Committee, who was being chaired by Jason Chaffetz at the time. It was a cover-up, it was a whitewash, no information was provided. But recently, a whistleblower came forward, a very valiant, highly decorated Air Force targeter who was in the A-130 that night that the tragedy occurred. She saw what happened. She tried to call off the mission. There was no reason for these servicemen to be hovering over the crash site for 13 minutes. And this has been covered up. And Jason Chaffetz covered it up. And I'm advised by her that she actually contacted Chaffetz about this after the hearing and asked him to look into it, and he didn't. So he is now ironically accusing General Mike Flynn of crimes when, in fact, he committed crimes by covering up this tragedy in Extortion 17.
Just quick questions. I need to ask for clarity. One you can answer right away, and that is you talk about this being payback. What do you mean payback?
Well, since it occurred, this tragedy, 3 months after the death of Osama bin Laden, our lawsuit alleges that Helmut Karzai and the government of Afghanistan offered our valiant and heroic servicemen up to the Taliban to save his own skin and for financial remuneration. Karzai is one of the most corrupt ex-world leaders of all time. And we also have sued Iran because they offered a bounty for each dead serviceman. And we sued the Taliban. This is in court right now. There's a default pending. We're looking for a default judgment. But in terms of Chaffetz's involvement, is that he covered this up, and he covered it up probably for his friends in the military who've had information here, and we're hopeful that President Trump will look into it, because it's also an issue of the rules of engagement, is that these servicemen were not able to fire on terrorists until they were fired on first. This is how Obama approached the war in Afghanistan, is that he valued a Muslim life more than an American life at that time. And in fact, that's why you have per capita more dead and maimed in Afghanistan than in any war in American history.
This is something definitely we are going to stay in touch with you and follow. It's an intriguing development. Thank you so much, Larry. Appreciate you being here.